Hello everyone, my name is Tracey-Mae Chambers. I'm a Métis installation artist from Southern Ontario. I've been working on Hope and Healing Canada for 3 years and about 4.5 or 5 months. And I've built 177 installations across Canada. This will be the 177th. It has evolved into something that was me knowing 2 stitches, 2 crochet stitches, to me learning how to weave, learning a variety of different crochet stitches, not very well, but crochet stitches, changing materials to be able to be outside for longer periods of time, growing to be much, much larger installations, which is wonderful. So that's been the evolution as it's crossed Canada back and forth several times at this point. Each installation is considered site-specific, so I tend to know some information about, say, a specific museum or gallery before I am installing there, and I tend to think about the environment. So let's talk about Kelowna specifically. This is aesthetically stunning. We have fresh water, we have beautiful trees, we have these gorgeous, glorious mountains, we have a climate that's hospitable, all the things that human beings need to survive, right? From wildlife to a good growing season to things to build with, it's all available here. Protection from the mountains, anything, just, right? So what a great place to settle. And I always think about things in the fact that although it was a great place to settle, there were other people here before that. And that's why I like working in places like this specifically because of that, because lots of institutions are looking at the construct that they're built on. And I don't mean the physical building, I mean the institution itself has a plethora of bureaucracy or whatever it is within it that is based on a colonial system of, we're here now, we're settlers, we're the pioneers of this, as though they did that on their own, or that they didn't get help from Indigenous folks that were here, whoever it was that was here. So it's more about telling the stories of each one of those places and interrupting that sort of narrative of the colonizing force, whoever it may be in that space, whether it's British or French. It's just disrupting that a little bit and have people questioning that. So Kelowna is no different than any other place in Canada to me. It's the same story, and the same story that's been told for a long period of time, but it's only one story. And there's so many stories, because it's not just Indigenous stories, there's newcomer stories, there's female stories, there's all sorts of stories that have been neglected or not told at all. And that's the purpose of the work, is to make sure that those stories are told as well. So Kelowna is one specific sort of part of a larger picture. Just like the circles that I use, it's one community amongst many. But if we remove that community, we are less than, because we're weaker because of that, having removed that community. So I have learned how to crochet more than the 2 stitches that I knew, and I've learned how to knit, though not very well, and I've learned how to weave over these many months of working. And I use a variety of materials, both natural and unnatural. Again, that's a conversation in itself, right? So some of the materials fray differently because they're in the elements, out in the elements, and I want them to do that, right? So the natural materials fade quicker than the unnatural ones. Although the unnatural ones still fade, acrylic still fades, but silk and cotton fade much quicker. So it's interesting watching that sort of evolution, and you can tell by this installation some of the pieces are more faded and more frayed, means they've been in more places across Canada, and that they've been outside for longer, or in windows for longer. And I find that's part of the human condition too, is that fraying, but we never want to look at that. We never, we're all uncomfortable with death. We're all uncomfortable with, people that are sick. Not all, sorry, that's not correct, but things fade. And I don't replace them with new. I just add on to them, or I fix them and add on to them. And that leads directly into the project, which is things are fixable. And that's why I chose to use material that I'm completely unfamiliar with. Well, I'm very familiar with it now, but textiles, because it's not permanent, whatever it is that humans think is permanent, steel, all those other materials. This is not. We know that, you and I know that, but it's not permanent. And I like that part of it. And there's a resiliency in that too, which humans certainly have. So as far as the red is concerned, I think it's the most powerful color, and it really is the only color that I could have used for this project. It's predominantly because of it being a racial slur, but also because of it being what we think of as the color of blood, what we think of as power, passion, love, anger, all those things tend to be tied up in the color red. So it was the right color to choose. But people will also notice that there's other colors in there as well. There's orange, which is paying homage to truth and reconciliation and every child matters. Purple, because of the treaties are with the crown, so being a royal color. And yellow for those that are lost. So you'll notice, not in all of the pieces, but that there will be yellow amongst some of the pieces, which is important is to do that as well. The other thing that you'll notice, just talking about the yellow, is that in most of the work, you're going to find shadow that's purposely made. And again, that's paying homage to the ones that have gone before us, but also recognizing the ones that are to come. And we have a responsibility to both those groups of people. So yeah, that's the long version of why red is a part of the project, or such a predominant part of the project. When I started creating this work, I realized I was fixing a blanket that one of my sons had some trouble with. I think his toe went through it or something like that. Anyways, and so I was fixing it and I realized this is fixable. And it was at the same time that Kamloops, the discovery of Kamloops was being talked about on the news. And although I can't fix this situation, none of us can fix this situation, we can work towards a more understanding commitment between several different groups. So Indigenous folks and settlers, depending on what Indigenous group is in Canada, we can work on that relationship. I have trouble sometimes with the word reconciliation because that would assume that there was a relationship to begin with, and sometimes I don't feel that that's necessarily true, not in all communities. So when someone reconciles, it generally means we've had a friendship and now we're angry at one another, and it's been some time and now we're going to reconcile. But that is not always the case in these communities where there was a friendship between Indigenous folks and settler folks. So again, that word I'm working through what word I am comfortable with, but I'm not necessarily sure that it's reconciliation that I'm comfortable with. But as a relationship ages, there are, it may become frayed, but that blanket that we've had for a really long time that's become almost felted is softer, right? It's a softer textile, it's a softer fabric against your skin. And that's what's comforting about a relationship that's a long relationship, that's respectful and kind, and really that's what I want to talk about more than anything else, is how do we move towards that being a soft old blanket, I guess, right? I'm soft and old, it's not an old blanket. But I feel like most things can be repaired, maybe not fixed, maybe not put back to its previous condition. You're always going to see a little line of glue, right, in a cracked vase, but it's still something we have to work towards, and that's a big part of the work too, is that when the work comes back to me and the parts are perhaps birds have stolen some stuff, or in one particular case it was squirrels, and which is fine because I'm okay with that. But it was just a strange sort of situation that I had to keep going back to fix it because they were stealing from me this yarn, and I was like, that's so wonderful. So then I left a whole bunch of it in the crooks of trees everywhere that I was, so that maybe they wouldn't take the ones from the actual installation. So that's been a surprising sort of antidote to the work. It's these little stupid little things that happen that I think are cheerful and hilarious. It's the squirrel stealing from me, but you know, I didn't care. It's like, let me get you some more. So that's been a wonderful part of it, and I think something that surprised me about it is the people's reaction to it, because once they know that it's been across the country, they can see that that some of the pieces have a more orange look, or that they do look faded, but they're still part of the community, still part of the community of weaving, so still part of the community of crochet pieces, or whatever it is, that nothing sort of discarded. And that's a big part of my work too, is that it's got to be in pretty bad repair or unrepairable for me to, you know, toss something away. So I'm glad that I chose this material specifically because of that. Every place that I have created in predominantly has some sort of a colonial narrative, even if it's, well, even more so if it's a residential school space where the survivors have allowed me into this space to work, which is, I'm so humbled by, beyond words humbled by. And navigating those spaces is difficult, but we all navigate those spaces every day of our lives, right? We're always trying to be kind to the people that we work with, be kind to the lady at the grocery store that's really rude, be kind to, most of us, we're trying to navigate those spaces. And I think it's exactly the same. We're just trying to bridge that by sort of, you build that part of the bridge from your side, I'll build this part of the bridge from the other side, and we'll sort of meet in the middle, and hopefully those two things will connect and we can find some sort of common ground. And I think that's what I'm trying to do, is that I don't have all of the pieces of the puzzle. The institution has pieces, the people that come in to see the work have the pieces of the puzzle, I have these pieces, and everyone else sort of fits it together. Earlier, some students walked by for a class or whatever it is that's going on here today, and I mean, that's a part of the pieces of the puzzle too, right? They're all little tiny pieces of this puzzle, because their view of the world is quite different from mine when I was that age, because I literally thought Indigenous folks wore loincloths because of one of the little books when I was in grade 1 or 2. And I thought, oh my goodness, does that mean my father wears that? Which I'm sure he thinks is hilarious, but because I'd never met him at that point. And it was strange thinking about that's what I thought of Indigenous folks. So even in an institutional setting like a school or a library, which I love working in, just an aside, all you libraries out there, I love working in libraries or archives. That is amazing, because who holds the knowledge of the world? Libraries, right? Archives. I love that. So yeah, being in spaces like that, it's just that bridge. The work itself is a physical bridge, tangible bridge between those two spaces. So even when I've flown away and I'm not here anymore, it's still a reminder, wait a second, yeah, she was here, and there's a didactic or some sort of information that says why I was here. And then it starts to make sense to folks, in a non-confrontational way about why we're doing this, why you and I are sitting here together doing this, which is such a positive thing, working in the right direction, I hope, which is the right direction. I used the knitting, crochet, and weaving specifically because, well, the crochet specifically because it was something my grandmother had taught me. Again, I only remembered those 2 stitches, and that's why the boys' blankets were so boring. But she never, I don't think that she ever had a job. I know she worked as a nurse's aide, but she didn't go to school or any of those kinds of things. But she, you know, she was a caring, loving human being. And I find lots of times I'm really hyper aware of how ferociously feminist I am. And I know it's uncomfortable for the men in my family because we've grown up in a world that's told us we couldn't do something, and read lots of books about art where women were not included in, many different galleries across the entirety of the world. So working in textiles and talking about something that's war tends to be, or the occupation of places tends to be a male-dominated thing. And so using something as soft and perceived as gentle kind of installation made of yarn is a complete lifting of the middle finger kind of thing. That I'm using something that many people might perceive as being weak, and yet it lasts outside for a very long time, right? And as long as I pay attention to it and nurture it, it's still going to be there. May not be permanent, but I'll keep adding to it, and I will foster this relationship with that body of work to make sure that it's maintained and maintain it. I think over time I've started to think that perhaps I chose that too because I'm not particularly feminine, and so if I was using steel or something, it would be almost expected because of the nature of who I am as a human being. But because I'm using something that's sort of the opposite of what I am, it's an even more, there is a delicate way that we can have a relationship with one another that doesn't include a gun, that it doesn't include harsh words, that it doesn't include me insulting you or being cruel to you or unkind or any of those things. And I find something like a textile is able to do that and yet be just as powerful. Because I don't think there's many people who could say that they had seen, for example, I'm going to say that Aga Khan specifically, because I have had to go back and maintain that, not every time, but every 3 weeks or so I go to just look to see how it's weathering, because it's been out 6 or 7 months now, plus it was out at the Governor General's residence in Rideau Hall. So it's been out for a long time. So I like to see how that's transformed into something different. So nothing else but this feminine thing could withstand that. And I at the beginning was really reluctant. Thought, oh my goodness, this isn't going to work. And then the more I did it, the more I realized it was the right choice, even though it was really difficult for me to use textiles because I didn't know how to do any of these things. But I'm glad I learned them because there's nothing weak about the work that I make, not structurally and not impactfully, right? The message isn't weak, and yet people assume that the materiality is, which pisses me off. But it's and then historically, we think about weavings, and across history that people have, that women have hidden messages within weavings, had a hidden angst within weavings. All of that, and that's why I learned how to weave too, because then I could use those colors and then started using the yellow and Parker dyed, because then it was my own little protest within that piece. Things like that, there's nothing weak about that. And yet, considered a craft or considered a woman's work or considered, the darning of socks is a kind of a pain in the ass, intricate process. And yet, we need to darn socks, right? Somebody needs to darn socks, whoever that person is. And it's important to be able to have that skill and to be able to do that. And more important still, to understand that the materiality is important. The fact that I don't throw it away is important. The fact that somebody who loves me maybe made that is important. All of those things, right? You cannot get angry with me over yarn, right? As powerful as the piece is, you can't walk in, see this, and say, I'm really, really angry. You can't. Because somewhere, in your life, somebody has made you something out of textiles that you loved, even if it was itchy and smelled funny. Which, come on, literally, Aunt Gerda made you something that you didn't like, but you still wore it at Christmas time or wore it when you saw her because it was a positive feeling that went along with that, or because your mother made you, one or the other. But still, it's there because we try to be respectful to one another. That's another reason why it needed to be textiles. I hope that when people come to see the installation, or when they see it online, or see it through however it is that they are able to view it, that it's impactful to them, and that it fosters curiosity to know what that work is about, what this body of work is about. And sometimes somebody is maybe only going to see the aesthetic of it, and that's okay too. I'm okay with that. They just see it as an installation and see it for what it is. That's okay. But what I hope is that they ask questions and want to understand more about how a relationship between Indigenous folks and settler folks can be repaired. Read more, find out more, engage more. That's really what the purpose of the work is to bring people together, maybe not physically, because sometimes that's not possible, but bring them together by just even reading a book about, right, something, or looking something up online and finding out more information about a reconciliation event that's in your area, or like just something like that. It can be as simple or complex as an individual wants to take on. That's what I hope they take from this, is that there is a way forward. We just have to go there together. We can't be on two separate roads running parallel to one another. Eventually we do have to actually be on the same road. And that's the purpose of this work, is try to sort of facilitate that a little bit.